I think sometimes we're just seeking that familiar, even if it's not logically the partner that we necessarily want to be building the life with.
So if that thing happens in your environment and your subconscious offers you that the reason that thing happened is because you're a loser, right, which it probably still will do, you can still show up consciously and say, oh, thank you, subconscious, thank you for reminding me of that, but I'm not gonna, that's not how I am, that's not who I am.
Most of us have started to not trust ourselves and not trust our word, because we don't keep our word to ourselves, because change is hard. To rebuild trust, we have to show ourselves that we're keeping those promises, and we can't expect our subconscious to get on board.
Our habits can either set us up for success or they can sabotage our lives. And in this video, psychologist Dr. Nicole LePera shows us how to take control of our habits to improve our life.
Change begins when you practice being conscious, practice showing up, practice observing yourself, practice observing all of the patterns.
Not just when it's calm, but when it's chaotic.
I actually don't suggest you begin to practice when it's chaotic. Practice when it's calm.
Got you.
So that you can practice when it's chaotic.
So give me an example, like when it's calm, how would you be responding in a certain way of love or peace as opposed to hysteria?
Yeah.
What would that be like?
I reframed that because I think it's really important. And
if you're not being triggered, then how do you practice?
Exactly. And a lot of us wait because, I only have an issue when I'm triggered.
Right.
So I'm going to wait to use this new tool then. So we can't just wait till then, because we're not going to use something new then. We're going to do the thing that was familiar then. So I really am, I harbor on the point of consistency and of just developing a consistent practice of what we're talking about now, of consciousness all of the time, so that when you really need to be observational of yourself, to see why, that dish that was left out was so incensing.
It's a trigger.
Right? And to create that space then, so that dish can still be there. I still can feel incensed by it, because that doesn't go away right away. But I might not throw it at my partner or knock it on the floor. I might choose a different response. So it's really a gradual evolution, but it starts by practicing consistently all of the time, starting in small moments, of course, because I'm the biggest believer in too much change too quickly overwhelms a system.
Right.
So your intention isn't going to be, I'm completely unconscious, so now I'm just going to start being completely conscious starting tomorrow. No,
it's not going to happen.
You're going to start to be conscious in one moment in your day for a good long string of days, and then maybe you're going to try to do it for 2 moments in your day, and then 3.
I tell you, my girlfriend moved in a couple months ago, and I'm so used to a certain routine every single day of the way I like things, right? And so when she moved in with our dog, it was like I had to learn so many new ways of living in my space and our space now. And I love to make the bed right away, right after I get up. She gets up, I get up early and I go to the gym, and I like to make my bed right away. She likes to sleep in a little longer and doesn't like to make the bed as quickly. And I had to learn, because we were making the bed quickly, and then it's like not being made.
Making the bed over top of her.
I know, I want to be, but I had to just learn to accept certain changes without reacting and being like, okay, even though I'm used to a certain way all the time, am I okay with not doing this or it not being done the way I want it to be? Now that I'm in a new relationship. And I've been able to observe and practice without getting upset or without getting mad, being like, okay, this is how it's going to be, and if I want it to be done a certain way, I can make a request, I can wait till she wakes up, and then I can do it myself, or whatever it may be. We can create some new type of relationship around it, but I need to be willing to evolve and change as well, where I'm not always going to get everything that I want all the time in an intimate relationship. Is that true?
Yeah, that's true. You also highlighted something very real, which is that it doesn't mean that right away you're right on board.
Right.
Right away you might wish that she was up and your bed was made, and that's okay. We shame ourselves as humans, because if we have that old reaction or assign that old meaning, immediately we become shameful. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't. It doesn't matter. We're going to have those thoughts. They're going to stick around for a while. We're going to have those feelings even. They're going to stick around for a while. But we can start to create new choices. And we don't have to feel badly, about desiring to live those old familiar patterns. It's actually part of being human.
I feel like I'm so proud of myself in the last few months, because my girlfriend moved in and it was stressful. For the first couple of months, there were so many beautiful days, but then there was things that would trigger her that then would trigger me, and
which is
cause
typically how it happens in couples.
And she's a passionate Latina, and she likes things her way too. So I remember just thinking to myself, I could easily go back into a pattern of trauma, resentment, feeling abused, not feeling a sense of fairness, whatever my childhood traumas were. And there were a couple times where I did argue from that place. And I realized this is not going to work. If I come from this place, this relationship will not thrive. And I'm not saying it's okay for her to come from that place, so we're working on things together. But I just realized, like, is it better for me to be right and try to prove my point and argue something? Or is it better to just listen, love, come from a place of peace in that moment, and then reflect and talk about it later, like the next day? Even though I want answers now,
Of course, we
I want
all
to
do.
resolve this right now. Here's why I'm right. I want to defend my point. But it's been a beautiful shift in my partner since I've been doing that. And just letting my ego go of like needing to be righter of a certain situation. It's amazing. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's amazing the amount of love. And I automatically switch to appreciation. Right when there's a trigger or something, I'm just like, I appreciate you so much. You're right about that. I'm going to work on this more. Even if she's not 100% right, I'm just like, you're right about this, and I can empathize with this. And it's been incredible. It's so hard to do unless you practice. And so what I do every morning is I just shower with appreciation when it's calm. And I'm like already in that
really
mode. And I just think that's a game changer. And I'm not saying I have it all figured out and I have this like perfect relationship, but I hear so many people in relationships who struggle. And I asked them, I was like, when's the last time you texted what you appreciate about them? Or when's the last time?
Just a litany of what isn't appreciated or what could be done differently. Well, you said two really, I think, beautiful pieces in that, which is that, I mean, first and foremost, I want to acknowledge you, Lewis, because you changed. Right? You didn't yet say partner change.
Right.
You said, I'm going to experiment with how I can have a new relationship with this experience so I can do differently. And a lot of us, when there's discomfort or conflict in a relationship, we do very quickly.
Want the other person to change,
This
right?
is back to that reactive way of living, right? If the environment is affecting me negatively, that we were describing earlier, right? So if you're my partner and you are the environment that's affecting me negatively, please change so that I can now feel better. But change comes within. I mean, so that was very beautiful, is that you owned the responsibility. I think there's also something to be said about this concept of right and wrong. I mean, not to go all esoteric, but we can make an argument for days about this concept of right. Is there anything right? And you said something beautiful. It's not necessarily a fight. We can shift from a need to be right or wrong to just an attempt to understand.
That's it. And empathize with where the person's coming from.
Where they're coming from, why they
way.
see that perspective that they are. What about, and something else I think that is beautiful is your realization that somewhere wrapped up in here was that past that was very painful for you, but very much alive in this moment. It doesn't mean that this moment embodied the past in an objective way. It just means that it triggered that part of you that remembers that past.
Right.
So very, really beautiful. I mean, I love that illustration because I think that really touches on the work that needs, or that we can all do for ourselves in our practice.
I'm just practicing, like, I'm doing things I normally wouldn't do, but also the things I normally wouldn't do have never fully worked for me in a relationship. You know, I'm always used to doing things my way because this is who I am, and don't change me, and don't try to, exactly, right? And now I'm just like, okay, even though it may seem a little more time to do this thing, or a little more effort here, or to sacrifice something else in my life to cultivate this over here, if that's what I'm calling it, a sacrifice. It's just by doing and experimenting these things, even though I was resistant to them in the first couple months, I'm like, do I really need to go do this thing in my life that I did all the time that wasn't really adding value, or is spending that extra 10 minutes cultivating this relationship more meaningful? And so it's just shifting the awareness in my life about what I thought I wanted to what's actually more valuable. So, not to go off on this, but I feel like what I wanted to talk about is people practicing when you're not in conflict. And the reason why tools don't work is because I don't think people are practicing enough when there's not trauma or stressful moments. And is there anything else that could, I guess, make the tools work except for conscious practicing? I guess it's also healing your traumas, but how do we start to heal those traumas?
Well, that's it, actually. So the way I think about a healing journey, I kind of build it into a foundational pyramid, if you will, right? With the bottom layer being our physiological body, our nervous system included. Because to speak to your point that you're very beautifully alluding to, which is that we carry dysregulations, physiological imbalances, nervous system dysregulation
What's the book? The Body Keeps the Score?
Body Keeps the Score.
I've never read it, but I hear it's great.
Yeah, it's really anyone reading. It's dense scientifically, so I know it can kind of dissuade people away from it because it's an incredibly pivotal, impactful book, and I definitely suggest people give it a shot. But I know that it can be pretty dense.
But the overall premise
is that trauma is stored in the body.
Yeah.
I'm a believer that most of us have some degree of a traumatic experience in our past. I'm a big believer in expanding the definition of trauma beyond the big T, the way we typically think about it.
It doesn't need to be a physical trauma. It can be emotional, psychological.
Oftentimes it's emotional, it's interpersonal, it's not feeling seen, not feeling loved, not feeling accepted as the authentic being that we are by typically our earliest relationships, our caregivers, our schools, our things like that.
Our best friends or whatever,
Yeah, so expanding trauma, I mean, I throw the net quite wide. Like I really have yet to meet people that don't tick some of the boxes that are, in my opinion, traumatic
What's the greatest trauma most people face or feel now?
I think not feeling significant, not feeling authentic in themselves, which began not feeling seen and authentic as a separate being in their earliest relationships. I think we all carry a version of that.
Really?
Because it's incredibly difficult for a human to show up for another human, an infant, their infant. So because we're modeling things directly, indirectly. So any conflicts, any struggles, any imbalances, any conditionings that's not so positive that caregivers, that parents, have struggled with, probably is going to be modeled in the exact same way. And this is where intergenerational patterns happen. If you look back in your families, you'll see the same sort of patterns, as you start to become conscious and as you start to observe these.
That your parents and their parents did this to them, and their parents did this to them.
Right. And if you really want to go into the physiological layer that we're talking about now, I mean, you were grown, right, as a baby, as an embryo in a body, right? So that human's body that's housing this little developing fetus is in some version of physical regulation or dysregulation, right? So if you really want to go back, these imbalances are affecting you in development. So then you come out, and then all of your body and how it functions is affected by the food you eat, by the choices you make in terms of how much sleep you get, how do you handle stress. Essentially what you do all day is going to affect whether your body is regulated or not.
How to say no without apologizing. I think as a people pleaser myself of the past and still recovering people pleaser, it's been really hard to learn how to say no over the last few years, but I'm getting better and better at it without feeling like I'm letting someone down or someone's going to be upset with me. As a kid who never had friends growing up, it's always like, I don't want to ruffle the feathers of the friends that I had. And so I have to learn how to be like, if they're upset and they don't understand, there's nothing I can do, and I'm giving them my best. So how do we say no without apologizing?
Yeah, it's hard. This is really grounded, Lois, and a lot of us, I mean, I totally resonate with people pleasing. I've been calling it an epidemic of codependency.
Right.
Back to this childhood where if we're not enough, what we do, we're very adaptive.
Yes.
So what most of us do is similar to what you did, right, with your friends, not having much friends. You became so attuned to the friends that you have to keep those relationships, right? We do that within our caregiving units, our family structures. We find a way to keep the things that we need, which are connections with other humans. Love from another human. We are interpersonal species. That is it. We actually need to be bonded together, like I said earlier, out of developmental necessity, and then just generally in life. I mean, think back to evolutionary days and tribes, and there's very real research out there now. The stress goes down when we are interconnected with other humans. Aside from division of labor, you can help relieve the stress of my objective life, just the emotions, and we actually release oxytocin when we're connected to another human. We need those hormones, so we need to be connected. So we get very adaptive and we find the ways. So if we've developed it in a household, right, where we're not seen as a separate entity and able to develop connections and relationships with other separate entities in our family. Again, I talk a lot about an enmeshed codependent family in our last talk. That's what I've come from.
Yeah.
We get very externally oriented is what I say, right? I start to become so attuned to the outside world so that I can manage how I feel by showing up to friendships or doing the thing or answering the phone call by not saying no. So once we come to that realization and we understand the impact that always being available has on ourselves and on our relationship. And it hurts our relationship.
It does.
Because
it hurts our relationship with ourselves too.
Yes. And what happens though is sadly over time, if I always say yes to you and even if I mean no, before I know it, I don't like you, Louis.
Right.
I'm not upset
I'm like, why are you upset at me for? You can say yes.
I'm like not really liking you.
You're resenting the fact that you're saying yes.
I'm mad at you, but I'm really upset. If I really looked down at it, I needed to start saying no. How the hell would you know? I mean, we like to believe that other humans, especially when they're our partners, are mind readers. We love this idea that people see the same reality as
not
us,
a mind reader, yeah.
right? But what we're talking about, you just don't. You're never going to have the same reality as another person.
Yeah.
So we like that idea. So we say the yeses, and then we get upset at the person. So it really is damaging of our relationships. And I know I lived the hard way. I had to learn how to say no. My go-to was not necessarily no with an apology. I liked apologies. I peppered those in. My preference was no with the excuse, with the why.
Here's why I can't do it.
I needed to validate the reason I was disappointing someone with this belief that it wasn't enough just to not to want to, or to feel like it, or just to be somewhere else in any given moment.
So how do we say no without an excuse or an apology then?
Yeah, practice. I mean, it's hard. It's very, very difficult. First and foremost, it's accepting the reality that you're welcome to say no. You're allowed to say no. And that saying no doesn't diminish who you are or the relationship. Again, this is an evolution of work. We don't just turn off, the belief that I have to say no to maintain these friendships. We don't just overnight come by a new belief, right? So we can practice. And I suggest practicing, I say like around the periphery, right? Start to say no. So what this looked like for me, I started to put up boundaries or to say my no's in my professional world where it felt a little easier, right? So some requests that would come in and from people that I maybe didn't really know, it would feel, and it's virtual, so I can even send the email, throw my phone, which has happened before, and run away and come back later to see what happened.
Hopefully they didn't react.
You know what I mean? So easier for me. So I practice there before I practice maybe saying no with my immediate family or with my partner. There's going to be there might be some relationships it might be even easier. Maybe you do have that one friend that is like casual about it. Yeah. You're going to find the moments of practice, but the theme for today, you have to practice.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be really hard when you're faced with saying that no. And what's going to happen is everything that happens in your mind that prevented you from saying that no for however many years you have not said that no, it's going to happen in your mind the second first of all, before you say the no, trying to convince you out of saying the no. So before you know it, you're saying yes again.
I know.
Right? This is where consciously
you have
to say no, period, the end, or no, whatever you want to deliver the message being. And then on the backside, once it's delivered, your mind is going to try to convince you out of that no still. Oh, you're terrible. Oh, this person is going to hate you. Oh, it's been 2 hours since they responded. Clearly this relationship is over. Right? Now the work is still on you. Don't spend time in that thought. Just like we were talking about earlier. Get the hell out of there.
Of course.
But don't expect it not to be there. I call them the feel bads. The feel bads have haunted me around every boundary I've set for quite a long time before they've diminished. And they still are there every now and again. I still find myself feeling bad almost into saying yes. Maybe I'm even feeling bad once I've said the no. But I'm like carrying that. But I get to choose. How long do I want to live in this feel bad?
It's not good, yeah.
And a really cool thing happens as you practice. You start to learn and see, sometimes you do get that feared response. Sometimes exactly what you imagine would happen that's not positive does. I got that a lot from my family. Not all the time. So if you focus on the moments where the thing that you feared most didn't happen, that relationship didn't end, those friends still were around and asked you to come to the movies next weekend, that's what I urge you to pay attention to. Because that's going to help you keep saying the no's and helping you shift out of the pattern.
I think if, it's not the end of the world if someone reacts in a negative way to your no. Because if they get so upset that unless it's like something so, like my wedding or whatever, and you've told them months in advance, or you've given them time, like, it all depends on the situation. But if it's a friend who's just like gets upset because you're busy one weekend for whatever reason, then is that a great relationship?
Yeah, that's information
want to spend more time with them. A couple of things that you said on how to say no without apologizing. You said a couple of responses would be, I won't be able to make it, and I'm grateful you invited me. You're not apologizing.
Thank you for the invite.
Thank you.
And I can't come.
You don't have to give a reason why. You also said, that sounds amazing, it's just not something I can commit to right now. So simple solutions you can use without having to say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to make it. I wish I could, things like that. So I really like that.
lot of people have challenges, right? Whether it be family or limiting beliefs, scarcity, relationships, health, whatever it may be. And a lot of people do talk therapy. But why does it seem like most traditional talk therapy doesn't work and people keep going?
Yeah.
And how can it work better for them? What do they need to do so that it starts to see benefits and results?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's your thoughts?
I'm really happy you asked that. So one of the reasons I think, and this happened in my own life, so anxiety was all I knew. I went to multiple years of talk therapy myself. I was actually in what is called a psychoanalytic training program. So think Freud, the couch, clocking. I mean, these are people that go into treatment each day of the week, 5 days a week for an hour. So I was training in that modality. And part of that training was we had to lay on the couch ourselves. And so at some points I was up in therapy 2 hours a week. I was on medication. I had, my SSRI, my benzo in the back pocket. And I was taking the traditional routes of treatment, and I still wasn't getting better. So for me, realizing that we have to look at the whole person. That's why I now work holistically, that there's a body that my mind that's unwell, if you will, is attached to. So for me, it was exploring the nutritional, the sleep, all of the lifestyle based stuff, because I was so physiologically out of balance that I wasn't able to, a lot of my symptoms really of anxiety, even sometimes even of depression, or what we think of as depression, are the result of those physiological imbalances.
Yeah, lack of sleep, anxiety constantly.
Yeah, big time. Food,
stress,
gut damage. I mean, we now know that the gut is incredibly important in our health. It's not only where nutrients are absorbed, that damage to the gut results in chronic inflammation that can be really, really problematic, in terms of our mental wellness. So for me, without that, I was just contributing and exacerbating my anxiety. So no amount of talking in a room, the way I see it, or even medication, because we also now know that the medication that we thought all the neurotransmitters were in our brain, like I said, are in our gut. So
so we're doing talk therapy, then having a gallon of ice cream and pizza afterwards. It's probably not going to help us, because we're going to go up, down, up, down, up, down constantly.
Yeah. So, and I can assure you, I've yet to find a program or meet a clinician, and I now have a whole network of them that I'm connected to that have had any version of that. I mean, the nutrition, the gut, the body is not mentioned in any training program. So I think that's a huge limitation. I also know that another big problem for a lot of us, whether or not we have the big T of trauma or the little t of trauma, is a dysregulated nervous system.
Yeah.
So now there's science. Yeah. So now there's an incredible amount of science. Dr. Stephen Porges is amazing. He does polyvagal theory. And so to put it really simple, unless we start to address that dysregulation in our nervous system that at this part most of us have, that's going to limit treatment.
So the sympathetic, is that fight or flight?
Fight or flight. Most of us are spending most of our time chronically in fight or flight.
60-70% of our day.
I mean, from this, I'm looking out at the vast city in the background. I mean, for some of us, the city is enough. My mind has now taken on a whole other capacity to induce stress. So a lot of us humans are living chronically stressed.
You could be in peace. You could be in nature, but your mind could be in traffic.
Yes.
Thinking and anxious.
Yes, and then you could have induced it completely in a panic attack. And I mean, I've seen it happen in my office. Content we're talking about, before I know it, the person's having a complete visceral reaction. There, right. So without regulation of that nervous system, I see that treatment, talking about it, only goes so far, because we had a great session. Thanks, Lois. See you next week. And now I'm out the door with my overactive nervous system, and that next thing's going to activate me, and the next thing's going to activate me, and I'm going to have a fight with my partner. That also speaks to the power of the subconscious. So what therapy is talking from the conscious mind. We can have a great, insightful, therapy session. I can understand. I can even have a great game plan, but then I'm back out the door, and if I'm not conscious, I'm back in my subconscious. And then I'm back in those patterns. So then what I would see week after week, me too. I thought I was very insightful. I thought I knew myself, right? And I'd work with people. We had a great session, and back next week, and it's the same report. Oh, got in the same fights with my partner. Right. Still stressed out about work. It's like nothing's changing. And it's because, again, therapy, the way I say it, only addresses that conscious mind. Even the best laid plans of what we're going to do, that next time we're activated, only go as far as me remembering to do.
Being aware and mindful in the moment when we're triggered, right?
To do these new things. So I think that those, whether it's the lack of the body attention, the lack of addressing the dysregulated nervous system, or really us not understanding. I mean, the subconscious is, as crazy as this might sound, not talked about. in any training program. So unless these clinicians are given these tools, I think that a lot of them are going to, and so part of it, I was nervous. I wasn't sure when I started to go and shout from the rooftops these new holistic methods, and how I did, find the traditional model to be limiting. I was nervous about what my peers were going to say, and they've been nothing but receptive, and I think a bit relieved. I actually offer professional mentorship sessions now, and I have at least 1 or 2 professionals a week that I'll speak to and help them to update their practices in these ways, because they say it, they know it, they're stuck, they're probably stuck in their own life too, and they don't see that. I think their clinical work being as effective as they know on some level it could be.
Yeah. So how do we regulate our nervous system, I guess? Or is that what you're saying?
Nervous system. So our goal is, we are actually structured as humans to be spending all of our time in the other nervous system, the parasympathetic.
Relaxing.
In that relaxed mode,
in the sun.
One might think only to need, right, when we are literally at risk,
or needing to go
threat.
eat.
Yeah. So the tool that I'm talking always about is breath work through conscious breathing. The easiest one being just retraining the way you naturally breathe. Most of us as humans now have evolved to being a bit of a shallow chest-based breather. So for me, I couldn't. When I first started doing breath work, I was like gasping for air. I'm laying down trying to get a deep belly breath in, and now I've practiced consistently enough that I breathe mainly from my belly, which indicates to me that I'm even spending more and more time. There's still times where if I'm feeling particularly stressed, I'll have to remind myself to breathe. As crazy as that sounds, I catch myself holding my breath, or I catch my breath being a little more shallow. So that's one that when I work with clients, I talk about right off the bat, because I don't see anything, honestly, as empowering as being able to begin to consciously gain control of the way your body is physiologically reacting, especially if you sit on that anxiety spectrum, and definitely if you have panic attacks, because I know that they feel like the most out of control place in the world to be. So to show people that, wait a minute, I can start to, and again, these aren't the magic elixirs. We can't breathe from the belly twice, or just use it as needed, as a lot of us want to do. It's not that. But if you do practice it, you can start to feel a bit more in control. And I don't find anything as empowering as that.
Yeah, and when we can calm the mind, then we can make a lot better decisions.
Yes.
But if we're in constant stress or fight or flight in the mind and the body, it's hard to be mindful of our reactions. We're just going to go back to our patterns of the past, right?
Yeah. Well, I love that you said that, because the mind and body are connected. They're interconnected. So just as much as you and I just said, I sit here, I think stressful thoughts, I'm having a stress body reaction. Our mind is monitoring our body's reaction too. So if my body is having a reaction and the stress hormones, they have a longer shelf life. I mean, cortisol, adrenaline, takes our body a bit to metabolize those. So our mind is going to continue to register that our body is stressed, and it's going to try to make sense of it. So then it's going to make it even harder to calm or to redirect our attention from a racing mind. So it's very interconnected. So that's why I talk about attentional control, getting the hell out of those thoughts that are becoming the issue and inducing the body experience, but also calming the body so that we can clip that up message too.
Yeah. It's working on both for sure. It's like, I try to think about if my mind is a bucket, right? And there's thoughts that I can put in the bucket all day, and there's thoughts that are coming in and leaving the bucket. How do I constantly fill it with positive, peaceful, loving, beautiful thoughts as opposed to chaotic, stressful thoughts? And I just try to decide every moment to have more beautiful thoughts than negative thoughts. And a lot of my practice is breath work, meditation, and gratitude. It's simple things. It's really basic, simple things. And the more I focus on gratitude, I find that my mind is in a peaceful, beautiful state. And there's no room for negativity when it's in a beautiful state. So it's a practice, because when we're in stress mode and we're in scarcity mode, it's hard to think beautiful thoughts. Because you're just like, I'm going to die. Yeah. That's how you feel. Like, no one loves me. They're attacking me. And this negativity and these negative emotions come up. So I just try to focus on gratitude for what I have, and that brings more peace and positive thoughts into the bucket every day.
Yeah. Well, you're actually speaking to something that's very real too. Part of the fight or flight response is a shrinking of our perceptual field, where we cannot see those expansive areas outside. We only can see the immediate, and we're actually primed to see threat. So that's why it's always typically colored negative. So those of us that are living, this is why it's also imperatively important to get out of fight or flight, or to build and practice that over time will shift us a bit more out of fight or flight, because we are, and this also goes into the whole financial climate. When you're living under stress, even if it's financially induced stress, I can't pay my bills, you are now dealing with a shrunken perceptual field that makes it hard to lock out of that.
It's funny, but once you start focusing on gratitude in scarcity, you start to create more abundance and opportunities to generate, financial income or the right partnership or whatever it may be. So it's hard to get out of that. But if you just focus on like, okay, what am I grateful for, and how can my energy shift to be a magnetic force field of good to come to me, good and
That's what it is. I mean, that's why gratitude, I'm so excited now because it's actually getting studied a bit, that gratitude does shift us vibrationally, energetically, that even a small practice, list 1-2 things a day that you're grateful for does have those effects. And it's becoming more and more proven that it does, because it's shifting our brain waves to a different frequency.
I always think about, people in service at restaurants. When someone's waiting on you and they come with a grateful, positive energy, I guarantee they're making more tips. And then if someone's negative and focused in their own head and just angry or down in themselves, you're attracting less. You're attracting what you're creating in the world. And I always hear these great stories of people that are so positive. It's like, I want to hire these people at these restaurants who are so positive and bring gratitude. I'm like, if you're grateful in this situation, I can imagine how you would implement this energy to something else. And I feel like they're attracting more of what they want by being grateful and their way of being, their energy. It's not easy. It's a practice. So how did you start to eliminate scarcity in your own life? What did you focus on when you recognized, okay, one of my limiting beliefs is not being seen or being scarce? So what were the steps that you did? Did you start to do inner child work right away?
So first I practiced consistent self-observation. I watched my thoughts, right? So I developed consistent now, and I resisted meditating consistently, but I built in a consistent meditation practice so that I could then carry that skill throughout my day, because I knew that's where I really needed it. So I practiced that consistent daily self-observation where I was looking at my thoughts, all day long, and
what, journaling them or just being
just
aware?
noticing, because the first way, and this kind of ties into something you were saying earlier, the first way that we can start to quiet our mind is we don't battle our thoughts away. We can't obviously hit the mute button on them, but we can start to pay less attention by removing our attention. So each and every time I would see that, because our subconscious is what's offering most of our thoughts for us, right? So my cupcake's gone, and my subconscious is going to assign that. I'm not considered scarcity-based meaning, not my conscious mind, right? So I don't have control over that. That's why I explain that.
Subconscious, you don't have control over.
We do not have control over. We can
reprogram
it through consistent repetition of something new.
By being aware of our thoughts consciously and being like, okay, that doesn't support me anymore. Let me have a new thought.
So the simplest way I put it is to change our subconscious. We first need to start paying less attention to those older narratives that are naturally going to be there. And I say this,
you need to pay attention to them first to pay less attention.
You need to notice them and then remove your attentional focus back to your breath, back to the current moment. And that is the tool, the muscle, I call it a mindful muscle that we're building, our attentional muscle. We all have one. Most of ours are just very wimpy, because either life that's endlessly distracting is grabbing our attention, or a lot of us are spending way too much time looking, if you will, at our thoughts. So noticing our thoughts enough to then redirect my attention away will weaken that narrative. So that's the first layer of work.
Okay, noticing, watching your thoughts. What's the second layer?
And then if you want to, the subconscious can be reprogrammed. So then I started to play around with, and the Future Self Journal was kind of where what I developed for this part of my own healing was to practice. I mean, what an affirmation is, a new thought, right? So then I would start to practice abundance-based affirmations, and that's a mental rehearsal. In the act of affirming, we're literally lighting up a new neural pathway in our brain. So our brain does not know whether or not I already believe that to be true or not. The goal is to repeat it enough that over time I believe that to be true. So the subconscious can be changed later in life. So what
was the mantra you were using for this?
I'm abundant.
Simple mantra.
Just simple one. Couple
words,
Just simple one. Yeah.
So whenever you'd hear like, trigger, my cookie's gone, whatever. Like, I'm abundant.
Right.
You just
First
say
it was get out of there, just
Notice
center
it.
myself. Sometimes
Okay,
I needed
breathe.
to take a breath because I always that was that goddamn cookie, And then once I had a second, then I could say, but and then remind myself that I'm abundant. There's a store up the street. Like, it's not about the lack of. But we first have to pull it away, because I think a lot of us try to go right in a strong arm and shift it, and it just doesn't work, because this is a belief that we've been practicing. I mean, some of us outside of our conscious awareness for as long as we've been walking the planet. I mean, so this is a really strong network. It's going to take time.
It's going to take years, potentially, decades, potentially, right? Mm-hmm. Now, do you associate the thought with a physical feeling or physical motion, or just like an abundant movement, or is it just a thought?
The way I define manifestation is pairing that thought with as if it's true. So how would believing me to be abundant, how would that make me feel? Would I feel free? Would I feel, limitless? It might be different for each of us. Okay. So that is part of it. But for me, so the narrative work is what I just described. Getting out of the old narratives, if you choose to be committed, practicing new ones, it can work. Yeah. The deeper level, because a lot of these narratives, a lot of our subconscious is touching on a wound or an unmet need. So for me, this is where this consideration came. So my deeper work, my inner child work, was now, as the adult that I am, to find the ways, and I had to find them. I did not know them. No one taught me how to consider myself. I did not have parents or caregivers that were modeling, kind of self-consideration or self-care in any healthy way, if you will. So I didn't know, and I say this because I think a lot of times when we become an adult and we think we should just know how to take care of our emotional selves. But if we were never taught, how would we know? I did not know. So then my deeper journey was, okay, how can I show up in the world consistently on a daily basis and consider myself, consider my needs, explore what they even might be, how to even give them words, and then what to do. I didn't know how to give myself a feel better. I dissociated. That's all I knew. So now that I was showing up to manage my feelings in a new way, I was like a little kid again. Wow. I had no fucking idea what to do. And I just had to move toward, okay, does this make me feel better or worse? And I talk with my clients a lot about this, because it can feel really overwhelming when you're trying to navigate your emotions now in a new way. We all have had a way that we've coped, and we got really good at it. But chances are that's not the way that's going to get us the relationships that we want, the life that we want. So for me, it was like stabbing around in the dark and just moving toward what felt a little better. And then you start to get a toolkit. You start to say, okay, when I'm feeling down, while I might hate to say it, moving helps me, or, a bath helps me, or a time alone helps me. I had to rediscover all of those new tools for myself in those moments. So that was the deeper part of the journey, is now, because I view it's my responsibility to consider myself, to learn how to navigate my emotions. And it's not my partner's job not to eat the cupcake to consider me. It's my job to, and then I realized over time I wasn't assigning through that constant attentional control. I stopped assigning, lack of consideration, meanings,
You stopped after a while.
Yeah. Eating food was eating food. Dishes on the counter were just dishes on the counter. And then I was building myself up enough and reparenting myself enough that I was feeling overall considered by me, so that when she offered me an active consideration, it was like, oh, great, but it wasn't necessary anymore. So my okayness and our relationship stability didn't depend on her showing up to give me a gesture of consideration anymore.
It was just an added bonus.
It was an added bonus. And then I was able to let it in more, because I think some of us become so rigid in exactly what we need from this other person to fit my need in this way. And now I could accept, maybe it's not the way I would want to be considered, but it's a little gesture of it, and it's consideration, and it still,
I'll tell you what,
fills my cup.
In your mind, who do you think would have a harder time? The child who feels not seen or taken care of by the parent, or the parent who is giving their heart and life to the child but doesn't feel seen and acknowledged for their caregiving?
Yeah.
Because I can only imagine
both. I can't.
Parents like saying, I'm giving you my life, I'm sacrificing my dreams, or whatever the conversation might be to you, and you're ungrateful, you're not loving, you're angry, you're... What do you think is more traumatic, the parent trauma or the child trauma?
I think very equally traumatic. And I was actually talking about this morning with my partner. There's an aspect of it that whatever the story is from the child side and from the parent side, that is their truth. right?
Their experience.
That's their experience, so that's their truth. Emotionally, that is their truth. Doesn't matter objectively if an observer would say, oh, no, I actually think you did give enough to your kid, or actually do see him being, appreciative right there. Doesn't matter, because either of those parties are living in their truth, which can be equally, in my opinion, as traumatizing. And probably chances are that parent, when they were a child, right, probably had some version of that experience, similar or almost complete opposition. Sometimes we kind of go in a overcompensation attempt to that. So so that my argument then being, so now you have a caregiver who probably is carrying their own trauma from their caregivers.
Yes.
And now is carrying their own trauma from having, a child. And then this is where a really big snowball gets created. And I think back to why now, why the popularity of the account, I think we're finally at a time in collective evolution where it's very apparent that these old ways, these old conditioning patterns aren't helpful. And now we're starting to have the tools, the internet being one of them, where all this information can come out and be out in the world. And now you see a collective evolution happening.
Yes. I don't want to cut you off, I apologize, but you said the triangle of healing journey, is that the pyramid? The body is at the bottom?
And the physiological ways we are dysregulated or imbalanced, and then the nervous system. Because without that balance, and this was my story for quite some time, because I lived my life in fight or flight.
All the time.
My whole life, in that sympathetic and a nervous system response, which means my nervous system, as yours does and as yours, controls our whole body. So when you're in that, we feel very emotionally reactive. Everything feels like we're waiting for that next straw, right? And next straw, and everything. I mean, my water being empty right now could be a straw if I, if I was like amped up enough. Living in that really prevented me, and this is why I'm so passionate about holistic healing. One of the definitions of holistic being of the body, also of a whole, mind, body, I believe, soul, how all of these parts interact. We need to include the body, because for my life, having tools, being in therapy, being on medication, my body was so dysregulated at the nervous system level that it didn't matter if I very insightfully knew that next time I need to call this time out with you, Lois, I wouldn't, because my body was too dysregulated to give me a chance.
Too messed up.
That's why I put that at the bottom.
So you have to heal the body first? Is that what I'm hearing?
You have to engage in a process, because this is long term.
Yes.
We don't make one change again overnight, and our body doesn't.
It could take decades.
It could take a long time. I mean, I've been on the healing journey for some time, and I'm still releasing areas of inflammation that I'm carrying in my body. My digestion is still working its way out from a lifetime of digestive issues related to my imbalance. Yes. So, and I'm years in. It got significantly better, along the way, but start by healing the body. And definitely, if you're out there and you're listening and you have nervous system dysregulation, if you always feel on edge and in that fight or flight, if you've heard that you have adrenal fatigue, now we have a medical diagnosis for it, you need to be adding some version of, whether it's breath work or some version of nervous system regulation in, because that's going to give you the balance or some foundation to then be able to dive in and create deeper change.
Okay, so the bottom of the pyramid is the body.
The body. Look at the choices you're making around your lifestyle, how you care for your body. Is there any things that you can add, change, decrease, and also look at your nervous system and build. I do a daily practice of breath work still, and I will always do it.
I just think it's a no-brainer. I think there's so many apps and programs and experts out there teaching it because it works. It's helping and it's powerful. And people have been doing meditation and breath work for thousands of years because it keeps them grounded, centered, calm, and not in a stressful environment. I definitely recommend practicing it. So the body's first, and then what's after that?
So moving up then to the mind.
The mind.
And developing consciousness. Creating,
Your
for a lot of
thoughts.
us, it means creating the distance from our thoughts, based in the reality that none of us are our thoughts. We believe we are. We believe we're our thoughts. We believe we're the story that we've told ourselves about who we are, right? When I went who are earlier when you were talking, I said, who we are, right? This is my narrative. That's all created. It's all created from our past conditioning. So even the who we think we are is not the who that we are. Those are patterns of thinking in our head. Those are stories that our ego is telling us all day long about who we are compared to who other people are. Who we are is the awareness that sits behind our thoughts. So this is what this kind of tier of thinking, mind work, is to first create that separation. I suggest doing it in a meditation practice. Our goal is to do it all day long. But when we're sitting, when we're quiet, even if we're meditating for 1 minute, which is definitely the amount of minutes that I suggest a new meditator to meditate for, because it's a long time. This is difficult. For some of us, it's the first time we're tuning in to our internal world. It's not always comfortable in there. A lot of us like to run away from it. A lot of us spend a lot of our day running away from it. So once we learn how to observe our thoughts, so by closing our eyes, by sitting in a quiet room, thoughts are going to come. That gives you the first experience of being separate, because who's watching them? You're who's watching them. The goal, though, is to build the bridge and to do that all day long. But it doesn't come overnight. Once we become an observer of our thoughts throughout our day, then we get to do the deeper work that I'm always talking about of the ego and the inner child, because you're going to start to see the very repetitive patterns in your thinking that are causing you to then have very repetitive, consistent feelings in your body, which are physiological. That's why they're real too. When we're stuck in consistent feelings, you know, it feels very invalidating to have people to say, well, just stop feeling like that. Well,
Right.
I can't, because
I've been one to blame myself and doing that to people in the past too. It's not.
Yeah, it's
until you really like go through this process, you can start to have empathy and compassion for everyone's journey.
Yeah, quite literally. We get stuck in feelings.
Yeah.
Feelings are physiological events in our body. They become familiar. So my story about me in fight or flight, my most frequently visited emotion was stress, was chaos.
Yeah. Every day.
It's all I knew. So
Until how long? Until how old?
Probably until I was
2
in
years
my
ago.
early 30s, you know what I mean? I'm 37 now, so
Wow.
not very in the distant past.
Wow.
I just lived in chaos. If you would be talking to me, Lewis, I would say, all I want in life, I'm a hippie at heart. I just want to throw peace signs, peace and freedom. That's all I want, right? But the second I would find myself what could have been experienced as a moment of peace or freedom, you know, maybe I'm sitting quietly somewhere, that was so uncomfortable.
Stressful for you.
It was
Really?
It was uncomfortable. My body registered as unfamiliar. You're not used to this. So then if no one was around, I would start to worry about the thing yesterday that happened, or maybe tomorrow, right? So now I'm creating a change in my body. Because the more I think a stressful thought, the more I release stress hormones, right? And now I'm having, my body's back into that zone of comfort. It loves being stressed. It's what it knows.
Right.
If a
It's used to it.
person was around me, this is where it gets really fun and complicated, bringing our relationships into the picture. If a person was around me, watch out, because before I knew it, if I was in that unfamiliar, peaceful space, I might agitate the situation. Before you know it, I might be picking a bit of a fight with my partner or whoever's around me.
Why are you doing this? Why did this
Increase
happen?
the stress, back to my zone of comfort. That's how I'm used to feeling. So that's back to that concept of stuck. We're stuck because we're subconsciously stuck in our familiarized comfort zone, even though that's not the place, or those aren't the behaviors, those aren't the thoughts, those aren't the ways that we're going to feel to get us the life that we want, but that's what's familiar to us.
Okay.
And so the more you practice self-observation, the more you get to see yourself living also very uncomfortable. This is uncomfortable work.
And you get to reflect and say, okay, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how traumatic was that feeling all day, or how stressed out was I? I was an 8 all day. Okay, why were you an 8? What's allowing you to stay at an 8?
Why are you still an 8?
Why do you stay there? What's the payoff, right? What's the price you're paying, and what's the payoff you're getting by being at that level?
Yeah.
What would it take for you to drop it 2 points or whatever? This is how I think.
What do you
in the
imagine
point
would
scale.
happen if you dropped it?
Yes.
There's
What
a
could you
lot-
create in your life?
Yes, but also negative.
How would your relationship be?
Some of us get caught in a negative feeling, as counterintuitive as this might sound, in fear of what life would be like without.
Right.
that
In fear of
negative
the
feeling.
good things happening.
Yes, it's very complicated.
Why are so many people afraid of more good things happening to them? Do they think they're not worthy or deserving of it?
What did you ask me when we first started, right? What is the trauma, the most prolific trauma? Not being seen,
Or feeling
heard,
enough?
feeling enough as a child.
Wow.
So if we have a deep-rooted feeling of not enough or not worthy, those are the two frequent iterations that
Why
I'll
should
hear.
good things come to us?
Why should they come to us? Wow. And it doesn't matter if logically you really want that good thing. If subconsciously you're an unworthy human being, you're not going to get it.
And that's why when people get it, they'll sabotage it and they'll lose it,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So how do we come to a place of worthiness, of truly feeling and knowing we are enough and we are deserving of goodness in our life? How do we get to that place?
I usually do it in a twofold process, because I think the first layer of the process is observing all of the times you're telling yourself you're not enough all day and stopping that shit. Meaning, you can't stop it. I'm joking when I say that, because you can't stop it.
Observe it.
Observe it. Your subconscious is going to give you that language, whatever it is. You know, we all have different languaging that we love to diminish ourselves around. So whatever it is, the thing that you're a loser, right? You're not worthy, whatever your language is.
Yeah.
You can't
replace
stop
it.
that from
Replace
happening.
it.
Yeah, but you can't stop that. So I want to just acknowledge that,
Observe
because
it.
this is another moment we could become very shameful, frustrated,
Yeah,
and tell us the
beat
work's not
yourself up,
working.
yeah.
Right? Why is it still here? I know it's there. Turn it off. Nope. So I observe it being there.
Yep.
But I don't. You said something important earlier. I don't spend that much time in it.
Yeah.
So what most of us
moments,
do
move on.
subconsciously, this is why I'm going to state a fact. Feelings have an end. They come and they go. Depending on who you read, or, how many seconds it is or minutes it is, or, they come and they go. We do not allow them to go, because I say we bring them up to our mental world and we do those gymnastics for it. So if you then repeat, so if that thing happens in your environment and your subconscious offers you that the reason that thing happened is because you're a loser, right? Which it probably still will do.
Mm-hmm.
You can still show up consciously, say, oh, thank you, subconscious. Thank you for reminding me of that. But I'm not that's not how I am. That's not who I am. So I can now remove my attention, put it anywhere else. What am I doing? Maybe I put my attention on my breath. Just get out of that script. Stop repeating it to yourself to simplify it.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the difference
script,
between it going, so using your language of changing the script, or just removing your attention from your thinking mind. Ground yourself in your body. Feel the room you're in. Do those deep belly breaths. Go for a walk and pay attention to your legs walking, as simple as that sounds. Get out of your mind. Because the more time you spend repeating, I'm a loser, I'm a loser, I'm a loser, now you are going to carry that feeling.
You are that.
Home. You might carry it in the next week. Some of us have lived in the past of feelings that have originated decades ago. Because we're repeating it. Because we're telling us that story, and because then the more we do that, the more we scan our environment for more and more evidence. So if something loser happened to me at lunch, I'm probably going to find the loser thing that happened to me at dinner and right before bed. And again, I could really start a snowball rolling down a mountain in not a helpful way.
So the first thing is observe it.
Observe it.
What's the next thing?
Remove the focus from it.
Remove focus. Okay.
Without judgment. Let me add that part in there.
Well, that's great.
Because this is where we get really judgmental of ourselves.
Of course,
too.
and beat up. Yeah.
Now we're a loser because we had a loser thought. You know what I mean?
Okay. Was there anything out? The 2 steps or?
2 steps, and then remove focus without judgment. And then this is where affirmation work can happen. Right? If we want to start, so the 2
replacing
layers
something
I was talking about.
positive,
Right? So first we want to decrease the amount of time and the fallout of negative thinking that a lot of us have been over-practiced. And then we can become impactful if you are someone who, affirmations, what they are, simply a new thought. So then if you do start to practice telling yourself that I am worthy, that you might have a chance over time of actually believing that. And then you might have a chance over time of actually seeing instances in your environment of your worthiness.
Yes.
But that doesn't work, and this is why, in my opinion, affirmation work in and of itself gets kind of called woo-woo, and a lot of people become frustrated, and it doesn't work, and it won't. Because if you do, maybe you have a morning routine where you tell yourself some beautiful affirmations, if for the rest of your day, as a lot of us are, you're back in your subconscious and you're not practicing consciousness, the rest of the day, your subconscious might be reminding you of how not worthy you are.
Yes.
And that's why I don't think affirmations are as successful as they can be. So until you start to remove that focus all day long and just be consciously present to what is happening without judgment, then you can start to give yourself a chance at believing over time that I am worthy, or whatever it is that you would prefer to believe of yourself.
I love that. We got the body, the next step, the mind. What's after the mind?
So once you've done a significant amount of time observing yourself, now you really can dive into the world of, the deepest tip, if you will, of the work is the whole world of the inner child, of the ego of the wounds that we're carrying with us that are coloring our experiences in our environment. But you can't do that work, as a lot of us want to do, until you have these other tools in place.
Until you take care of your physical needs, the body, until you help with breath work, meditation, calming the body, relaxing the body, then observing yourself, your thoughts, why you're reactive, why things are stressful for you. You can't heal the inner child or the ego until you do those first 2 things. Why is that?
Well, you won't, first and foremost, you won't be able to see it happening.
You're too stressed,
because you go, I say you're unconscious. Back to our examples, right, of our arguments, I'm unconsciously living in my past in that moment. So you can't really see, to be observational, you need to be there in your conscious. You can't see what's happening. You only see the reality that you're telling you, what you're feeling. You're just feeling in that moment. So I'm upset that you hurt me. I'm upset that you, what have you me, right? You're not actually observing what happened and what the story you told yourself was about the dish, to go back to that example, that led you to be so incensed. The dish did nothing in this example, right? The dish is just a dish on a table. But when you saw that dish, you said something to yourself. You rehearsed, you went through some filter that then colored how you're feeling and then what happened next.
They don't care about me. They're abusing me. They're whatever.
And until you show up consciously and practice seeing, observing that, you have no idea. You actually think that dish was the problem, right? You're so stuck in it, you're unconscious to it. So it can't be done until you start to develop that distance and that space that I'm talking about. Because even when you're doing the ego work and the inner child work, those reactions are still there, alive for you. So if you don't have that space, you're going to continue to choose those old reactions. So as you practice consciousness, that's what gives you that space. So they can be here and be happening in your world, in your subconscious world, and you can still be online and making the choices, not allowing them to make the choices.
This alone, this part of this interview is just going to transform so many people's lives just by understanding the process. Because I think a lot of us try to just do breath work and think we're going to get healed. Just think about our ego and healing trauma or the inner child work. But you need to do, it's like the process is so much clearer. And I know you're going to be writing about this in your book, which I'm excited about, but this process alone is going to change a lot of lives. So I'm very grateful we're going through this. Is there another step to this pyramid of healing, or is it the body, mind, and ego?
Well, then I would ask you to draw a big circle around it and say in repeat for life. Never ends.
Just like a circle just keeps going.
That's the final piece. And that's, I joke when I say that, but I mean that wholeheartedly. Because just as much as I don't know where to start, I want to just work on one thing, a lot of people, myself included, want to hear when the end happens, when we're just done.
It's never done.
Yeah.
The healing journey is a lifelong journey until the day you die, probably.
And just as much, right, if you do all this work and you get to this great place, if you stop making these choices, if you let your body fall into disarray, you're right back into that dysregulated state before you know it, right? If you stop being conscious, before you know it, you fall into some other, like maybe it's different narratives or different habits that you're now living, but you're still living in an unconscious state.
What is the practice every day then? Breath work / meditation, prayer, and then what would the practice be on observing self thoughts in the mind? Is it kind of just an all-day practice?
Yeah. So what I do,
it's never stopping.
So what I do is I show up and I do meditation every day, just in a contained way, just to keep. I mean, it's a mental exercise, so that I can carry that then practice throughout my day. So I don't. Not everyone has to have a structured meditation practice. I just think it's helpful, to have that consistency every day, right? And to remind myself, okay, this is what you're about, Nicole. You're not those thoughts that are some days my brain is much louder than other days all day long, depending on what's happening. Sometimes I have resources to make new choices, that I want to make, and some days I don't. I fall right back. If I'm tired, if I'm hormonal, some days I still react in those old ways. So I keep a consistent daily practice as that mental training, as that I start my day in peace. And then I practice all day long. I try to be as conscious as possible. I've now learned, remember, I am someone who I just said a couple minutes ago, I spent my whole day dissociated. I was on my spaceship. So this took me a long time to cultivate the ability to be present in my body and in my moments throughout my day. So this did not come overnight. And so all day long, then it became a practice of, I learned to distinguish between when I'm not present. I learned how it feels in my body or in my interactions. Like I can tell when I'm like somewhere else now because everything feels a little fuzzy. I feel a little more distance. I maybe can't feel grounded in my body, and I can tell when I'm here. Obviously, then I try to make the decision on more occasions to bring myself back into that conscious state, back into that presence. So then I do that all day.
Yes.
And then as I'm journeying about my day, I am gifted with teachers of triggers, meaning I, tell myself stories, and I can be observational then in those pivotal moments. Okay, why did this thing that this random stranger said or did to me become so upsetting? And then I can start to uncover, this is my ego still, telling me this story about myself. Or, this is my wounded child who really just wants to be seen in this moment.
Gosh.
Right, so then it becomes a varied, experience on the daily. But once you're conscious, then you can begin to navigate your daily life.
I have so many limiting beliefs in my own, passed on from my own upbringing, experiences I've had.
Still, you have limiting beliefs?
I've overcome a lot of them, and that's why.
What were the biggest for you?
Big time scarcity mindset.
Like scarcity around relationships,
everything.
Health,
It's
money,
really. I've noticed food was one of my things. I didn't know until I started to explore some of my patterns, and for me, scarcity ran the
What do you
entirety
mean around
of it.
food?
So this idea, and it would come up in my big joke in my relationship a lot, would be, you know, we lived together and we'd have items in the food in the fridge and we'd shop together and we eat the same diet, and I would go in, where's my half? And became incensed by, where's my goddamn half of food? And I was like, why is this so upsetting to me? Like, I'm not going without. I live
grocery store next door.
Literally 3 blocks I live. I can walk to a Whole Foods. Like, there's no reason why when my half goes away, what was that about? And I started to realize the underlying driving thought of this was that scarcity. So my food, my things, lack of money, mindset, things like that. So that was a really big one. I used to think genetically in some ways. I would see the way people and the way their bodies looked and how they were in the world. I was just, not gifted.
Wow.
So I think that a lot of my own healing journey was overcoming that, which is why I'm so passionate now about helping other people, because I think a lot of people are limiting themselves based on, and again, these don't come out of nowhere. These mindsets, the way I see it at least, they all come from an accumulation, as I put it, of our past experiences. So
was there like, I was talking about this morning about memories, about how really we have maybe 5 or 6, maybe you tell me differently, you're the psychologist, but I think we have like maybe 5, 6, maybe 7 strong positive memories. And then we have 5 or 6 or 7 like strong negative memories that we always kind of reflect back to and think about. And obviously there's filler memories, but I was like, I don't really remember much from ages 5 to 18 in between those 5 to 10 memories on each side. If I really focus on like, okay, what did I do in 3rd grade when I was like 8 years old or whatever it was, every day, you kind of forget like the 365 days in between the memories that we hold on to with these patterns. Is that kind of safe to say in my uneducated?
Yeah, 100%. And what I would offer is the reason that you have those really high positives and maybe really low negatives was because of the emotionality attached. So the bigger the emotion, we tend to be able to retain those memories. Those memories, because our memory center, our emotional center, our limbic system, it's all interconnected. And a lot of the reasons why we encode and then can retrieve, essentially put the memory in and access it later is because of the emotionality.
So how strong it was. So what were the memories you had, the experiences you had that created the limiting beliefs?
Right. So
the scarcity.
It's interesting you say this, because then there's another category, and this is where I fall, and I actually diagnosed myself with a memory impairment for quite some years.
Memory impairment?
Impairment,
like
based on the fact that I had no memories.
I dated a girl that said she didn't remember anything before 18 one time. And I was like, she was super positive and amazing and loving. And I was like, there's something off if you don't remember anything before 18. Nothing? I was like, how's that possible?
Right.
There's got to be some serious trauma that you're.
Right.
And later I found out like there was incredible trauma. But
well, I think societally, so there is that. So So when I realized I had no memory, I had two theories, two working theories. One was that I had such a cataclysmic trauma, that I can't remember, and that washed all my memories. And I spent a lot of time thinking, and oh gosh, what could it have been? And I keep coming up with, and then the other diagnosis that I gave myself was a memory impairment. So anyway, flashing forward, I've now come to realize that I started to share, when I got the Instagram platform, I started to talk a bit more openly about my lack of memories. I started to understand our nervous system and our stress responses a bit more. And I came to realize that more of us than you would realize are like this ex of yours and myself, that we don't have memories. And it doesn't have to be, a biological thing wrong in our brains. And it doesn't have to be the big T, is like the big T trauma that I think a lot of us talk about, the big cataclysmic event.
I feel like you'd remember the trauma,
right?
Right.
Yeah. So sometimes it's a low level stress, chronic stress, and inability to have emotions present in the home that results in that lack of memory. So anyway, to answer your question though, the way I came to know that I had a lot of my lack-based mindset was because we still remember. So I have people who reach out to me and are like, oh my gosh, if I can't remember, how will I heal? So I don't have a visual memory. I can't go back in time. And when I talk about inner child work and you go back to heal, you don't need the memory to heal. the way that I see it, because we all are a walking memory, whether it's in my
Based on our
habits, based on our
Yeah,
reactions, our
yeah, yeah.
triggers, our patterns, the thoughts that we frequently think. So a lot of mine would orbit around lack-based or not having type of things, lack of consideration. So we can see evidence of our past, whether or not we see our past
Based
in
on how
that
we're
more
showing up
visual.
now.
Yes.
So you were being, you know, for example, you were like, where's my food? My half is gone. Or you took 3/4 and I only have a fourth. And so that's definitely like reflecting a memory of experiences or an experience you had that you held on to and said, like, I'm not deserving of enough, or there's never going to be enough, or whatever the story you said to yourself, right?
A lot of mine was based around this concept of being considered. So for me, it was a bit of emergence between lack. So when I attribute that to my dad, he very much was, my parents are much older. When they had me, my mom was 42 and my dad was 45.
How old are you now?
So, and I will be 37 in September.
Oh, nice.
So,
Same age.
So, yeah. So, my dad very much had a lot of the depression era-based thinking. I mean, my garage looks like a fallout shelter with literally twine wrapped up, because enough twine put together, you have a rope. I mean, that kind of, so very direct ways and indirect ways. I'm sure my dad's messaging about money and holding and keeping, and then the consideration piece gets wrapped up in there for me.
You weren't being taken, you weren't being considered.
Not being considered.
Like you weren't being seen or
not
weren't being
yes,
thought about.
and that comes to my mother, who was very much emotionally completely vacant, absent, and so not feeling seen, heard, understood. So for me, when items would go missing, like my brownie that I really wanted, it became not only do I not have enough for me, but the meaning that I assigned was I'm not considered. And that would open up a really deep wound. So when my partner's looking at me like, what the hell is wrong with you? It's a brownie, Nicole. I'll go get you another one. Yeah. You know what I mean? So, but inside I was like a little girl who was not being seen and was being told that there's not enough for me. And I mean, so that's where that pain was coming from when I was tearing around the apartment about my brownie. It wasn't about my brownie. And I think that's the way that, I mean, if we all look at ourselves and our patterns, and I'm always talking about developing self-observation to do that, all of our clues are there. Our past is present with us. And that's why we're stuck. And that's why we can't, the way I see it at least, that's why a lot of us struggle to move forward. And that's why I hear the word stuck probably more often than I hear any word spoken.
So how do people get unstuck?
First, I think consciousness. We have to become conscious to ourselves, because we're in our autopilot 95% of the day if we're not conscious. And that's going to be like the program. I mean, the computer analogy is, I think, the one that we all understand the most. That's going to be the program that we're running day after day after day. So without consciousness, there is no change. And then becoming conscious to our patterns. We are incredibly habitual creatures as humans, whether it's our daily habits, behavioral habits, whether or not it's our patterned thoughts that a lot of us have. We all tend to think the same content type thoughts. And then the way I say it is they induce feelings, actual changes in our body's physiology and our neurotransmitters and our stress hormones. And then that becomes our normal. And that becomes our stuck place. So without consciousness, I don't think change happens.
So awareness is consciousness. Awareness of our patterns, of our triggers, of our pain, of the trauma.
Right.
Does that mean healing the past first and reflecting on all the past? Is that why people do therapy, talk therapy? Because you're talking about the things that created the pattern today?
Yeah. I am always a believer, and I explore this within myself a lot, how much is the past necessary? And I keep coming to the conclusion that it's necessary, that becoming self-observational, understanding, I think that developing through a mindfulness-based meditation practice is incredibly helpful, because it actually helps us to fire up our brain in a new way that then allows for self-observation throughout the day. Because I don't think there's no magic cushion, there's no magic anything. The way I see it, we can't do something once and then expect my day to look different magically because I've meditated in the morning. Yeah, there's some gains and some peace. I mean, a joke you made, like, oh, I meditate in the morning so I can, calm my mind. Yeah, we get a little residual, carry away from sitting and meditating. But if I'm not watching myself throughout the day, and if I don't train myself to watch myself throughout the day, to watch my patterns, to watch the thoughts that are causing those emotional reactions, and especially to see when I'm triggered, just when I'm having a big feeling about a current event. And typically the feeling is really big because it's about the meaning assigned to the event, the similarity of this now event based on my past experiences. And so there's always a reason why things are way bigger than they maybe ought to be logically in that moment. And then that's where we dive in and give ourselves some new, either releasing the emotional valve, soothing our own emotional wounds in that moment, not looking outside of anyone or anything else to make us feel better. At least that's the way that I view it. I talk a lot about interdependence is the kind of term that I've been going back to a lot recently. What does that mean? Essentially being, because we are social creatures as humans. We actually benefited quite greatly from having tribes, as we were evolving in terms of safety and division of labor. So as I see it, we need, quote unquote, little n need relationships. Yes. But I think what interdependence means to me is being able to be a self-reliant and resilient, a human, meeting all my physical, emotional needs separately, and then having that shared space of relationship.
How does someone become interdependent if they've been so reliant on the needs of other people, especially, under 18, the needs of parents for financial or housing, food? Yeah. But if we're talking, adults, how do you become interdependent? Mm-hmm. When you have a lot of trauma or pain or... Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, developmentally, Lewis, that is the reality. Up until at this point, I think, unfortunately, because of some of the financial struggles that many people are having, I think even now adults are finding themselves much more compromised and in a dependent...
College debt and everything.
Yeah, place, or living, back to live at home, to be able to pay for college debt. I mean, it's really a shame. It's sad because I think we're shifting back into that more just necessary dependence. So wherever you sit on that spectrum, I think it's, about breaking those patterns of looking outside of ourself to show up for others, take care of others, get my needs met by, relating with others, whether it's because they make me feel better or they distract me or I've learned that. I come by this really naturally myself. My family was, and a very large reason why I'm not able, or I choose now not to have contact with them, is they are so enmeshed and codependent where there's just no boundary. And direct and indirect messaging that I got growing up was that I was responsible for other people's feelings in particular. So for me, evolving out of that and starting to separate myself off and just see myself as a self-contained human also meant then showing up differently in my relationships, putting up the word we all love to hate, which is boundaries, and learning how to carve out space, not only physical space where my needs might be different than another person's needs in that given moment, but more importantly, emotional space. And that's, I think, a struggle that a lot of us have.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of people that struggle with family and boundaries. I've gone through this challenge myself with different people in my family throughout the years. And on one end, I have a lot of guilt tied to responsibility to make sure my family's taken care of, at least basic needs, right? On the other end, I'm like, okay, we've all come from the same place. We all have certain skills and the capacity to take care of our basic needs. It's not like we were homeless or something like that. Like, we all got college degrees. We're all very privileged in a certain sense, right? Sure, we all faced a level of trauma and have our own level of limiting beliefs based on experiences and trauma that each one of us felt separately. But I still have this challenge with, like, okay, do I just make sure everyone's taken care of all the time, and then I feel taken advantage of or abused or not respected or whatever it is? Or do I set boundaries and have people potentially hate me and not want to talk to me? You hear these catchphrases like family is everything. Always be there for your family. Nothing else matters but family. But what about our own emotional well-being? Doesn't that matter?
Yeah. That's
so how do we manage the guilt and pressure and the feeling of responsibility of needing to provide for our family or take care at all costs versus having personal freedom and peace in our own heart?
Yeah, absolutely. It's tough. I made that noise when you said that first one, because family is everything might as well have been a plaque
in your home.
In my home. I mean, that was said as a mantra. Family is everything. Family is everything. Family is everything. It was under the guise of the Italian, culture. My dad's very much, kind of 100% Italian. And
if you're not a part of the family is everything motto, you might as well not be in the family.
Yeah, it was really, so a lot of us, I do know that we get that direct. Some of it's a bit more indirect, where you're just kind of not urged, or things aren't fostered that take you out of that family unit. So there's a lot of ways that I see it, that these messages are internalized, and then we become the adult that begins to believe that ourselves on some level. So the thing I will always say first and foremost is boundaries suck, especially when you're creating them with our families. I mean, these are dynamics that have been set in place for as long as some of us have walked the earth. So when we change a dynamic that's already one way, it sucks even more. However, I say that because it's uncomfortable to put up boundaries and to start to define limits of what it will no longer work for you. But what I see that saving ultimately over time, so the immediate discomfort, that's really uncomfortable for some of us.
It might be immediate for years.
It might
right?
be, yeah. But the way I see it, on the other side is a much more sustainable relationship. Because even in the description you said, right, I start to feel resentful, taken advantage of. And the problem there is I then look to these people who are taking advantage of me or not respecting me or not giving me something back. And I get mad at them. And then the relationship suffers. But unfortunately, I have to look at me and the role that I played in continuing to show up in a situation that wasn't working for me.
Wow. So when did you, I guess, leave talking to your family or connecting with them? How long has it been?
So it's been officially a year. But this
right when you started Instagram.
Right when I started Instagram. Right. But this was it was several. I mean, one might say it was a lifetime in the making. Because
you tried to make it work. You tried to separate. You stayed in. You
yeah. And so part of the situation with me, and again, I never prescribe my path as for everyone.
Sure.
We all have different journeys on this planet. So part of the situation that made it inherently more complicated was the fact that my mom, my dad, and my older sister, who was 15 years older than me, I was a much later in life child, live in the same home.
They all live together.
Live in the same home, yeah, with my nephew as well. My sister.
Your parents are what, 70?
So my mom will be, she just turned 79. My dad, I think, is 82.
Wow. And your older sister, who's...
And my older sister is 52, yeah.
They all live together.
They live together in the home, and now my 12-year-old nephew. So...
And he lives there.
They all live in the home.
Wow.
So talk about a living...
So you don't live there.
So I escaped. I've gotten out. I actually got the hell out as soon as I turned
18,
college
20,
age. Right?
yeah.
I think I was 17 when I flew right off to college, and I was out of there. But I say that because I tried every version of separate relationships.
Like
with
what?
them.
What are those versions?
Hey, my sister's name is Suzanne. Suzanne, let me try to, have a separate relationship over here with you where we don't talk. My mom is chronically ill. So another bit of my background, my mom is chronically ill and has been my entire life. There's now a bit of a pain pill, not a full-blown addiction. I mean, she just is really
numbing
tolerating.
Pain, yeah.
I mean, that's exactly what it is, Louis, to be honest. But so pretty much my mom is the orbit around that my whole family kind of
nucleus,
shifts.
yeah.
Yeah, she's the nucleus. So mom's health, and my mom has had, when I was in my early 20s, which was probably at the height of my anxiety, where I was living in New York, it might as well have been one panic attack after another that I was living, because my mom was actually having a pretty serious heart surgery at the time. So yeah, there's like micro health things. So, but it's always, how's mom doing? Is mom okay? Mom has this health thing. So one of the versions that I tried was having a separate relationship where we don't, talk about mom and health and
talk about life in general. All life.
Anything. I mean, I'll talk about the
anything.
dogs.
Yeah,
what you watched on television. Just
anything.
And it just couldn't, and then
she couldn't, or
she couldn't. Beyond that, it was always, I was needed to go to this doctor's appointment and that, and it was just this endless search for this cure of this illness that it just got really complicated. Tried separate relationship with my dad. My dad might as well be a million miles away, just always worried about my mom. My mom is just now at this point with the pain pills completely on another planet. So I say it was a year ago when but I tried every version of direct communication. Yeah. I would just remove myself, not go over as frequently. Then I would get the goddamn it text, where are you? Call us back. We're worried about you. So much anxiety. So finally, about a year ago.
So what do you say when you create a boundary of separation from your family? Are you saying, I'm choosing not to speak with any of you anymore? If you want to talk to me, feel free, but it's not going to be on your terms. What do you say to them?
So, I mean, the way I suggest is a boundary is an I statement. So if this continues to happen, I will no longer whatever. So obviously it depends.
What a threat.
So, I mean,
You're
that's
threatening me?
That's what people,
right? They
that's
make you,
what
they
people think it
manipulate
is.
and guilt you into like.
I think the difference, and it's interesting, I was talking with Melissa Hartwig on her podcast, and she asked what is the difference between weaponizing boundaries and having a boundary, and what is this idea of ultimatum? Because I think that's how it's received.
A boundary is an ultimatum.
But yeah, I mean, it is, but the way I see the difference is I'm not saying I'm going to do something. This is me. If this is my limit, and if that gets crossed, I am now going to take myself away, to end the conversation, to kindly talk to you when you're a bit calmer, right? And I think that anytime it's me or I based and not, I think that's when we can shift out of that idea. However, Lois, I mean, of course, there's going to be someone on the receiving end of that might, say, and so at my meditation yesterday, I met a lot of followers, and it was an incredible experience. And they, more often than not, every 3 mentioned the concept of boundaries. The fact that they had no idea what a boundary was until they started to read my work and other people's works. Then they started to use boundaries, and we're talking about how incredibly difficult it is. I actually put a post up today about a lot of the feedback that one gets, where we're told we're selfish, we're holier than thou. Who the hell do we think we are, putting up these boundaries? So, I mean, the short of it is they typically aren't received.
Well, no, there's always going to be some type of manipulation or guilting, or are you better than me now, or you've changed, like you wrote in your post today. Man, so what was the reaction like for you with your family when you said, okay, I'm choosing to do this if this continues to happen?
In the beginning, it was kind of just another joke in my family is you might as well talk to this wall right here. Right. So it was heard. It wasn't responded to. But 3 days later, 3 texts later, back was the content that I wasn't interested in talking about. Or like I said, I would try to experiment with a little more distance between calls or visits. And then every now and again, it would get met with either anger or worry. Where am I? Am I dead in a ditch somewhere? I mean, just these crazy.
So you just not respond to their texts anymore? Or
I would
just say, please don't message me unless it's something positive.
Yes. Or and if it was direct content that I wasn't interested in discussing, I would say, I've asked us not to talk about this. I don't care to have this conversation. I don't.
It sounds like unless you create a boundary, we get what we tolerate in life. So unless we create boundaries or guidelines, we're going to continue to get the things that we tolerate. And if you don't like something but you tolerate it, you can't expect someone else to change if you continue to tolerate that thing until you make a clear request. This is my request, that we only talk about these things, or we eliminate this from our relationship, or whatever it may be. And moving forward, if that doesn't happen, I want to create a boundary for myself. Right?
Yeah.
We have to create a request. Yeah. And it can't be an angry, mean request. No. It needs to be like a calm, loving request.
Yes.
Usually it sounds like it's never going to be a calm response because the person may not want to change, but that's the way it's got to be, it sounds like.
Well, I always define 3 steps. The first one is to define it for yourself. And for some people, we don't know at first. We've never heard of what a boundary is. We don't know that we can. So this is, I always say, this is an individual process of looking within, maybe kind of step back and gauge some of your relationships, see the ones that are working and what looks or feels different about those and the ones that aren't working. So that's a process. So defining your boundary, then putting up, enacting your boundary where you're communicating it. I love you already very intuitively set at a calm time where both parties are not reactive. You're not going to shout this out in a fight. It's probably not going to be the best time. Objective language, I think, is really great.
Make it about you.
Where you just make it about you, right? And you just, not no fingers. It's not you. You guys are crazy, so I'm never coming over. Probably not going to be the most well received. And then the third step is also our responsibility, and only ours, is maintaining it.
Follow through on it.
Is following through, because the second we don't do that, we do send the message that enough guilt, enough anger can, and I say this too, and I know this can, kind of. I don't know, the way people can receive this can be, many different ways, but a lot of times we're not upholding our boundary because of how we feel. I call it the feel bads. So we take our boundary down so that we don't feel. I come by. Feel bad. Why do you think I talk about them? I come by the feel bads as part of my family. We love to feel bad, right? But I say that because, again, it's our job to tolerate the way we're feeling, and it's our job to tolerate our feel bad and not to do the easy thing that's going to take our feel bad away, which is acquiescing. Yeah.
And then be resentful all over again, be angry
at that person. Yeah, exactly. And I know that's where some people are. Well, it's. So it's like a lot of the times, and I'll even go little bit deeper into this, a lot of the times that we struggle with boundaries is because of our own feelings. We don't want to put limits up because of how it makes us feel. Yes, we don't want to hurt people that we love. And a lot of us want to show up as a caring individual in the world. I, myself included, I fancy myself a very kind, considerate person, but there's a limit. And a lot of times the reason why we don't even initially have boundaries, again, because we weren't modeled them, but because we don't like how it feels. We feel bad.
Yeah. Because you don't want someone else, as a people pleaser, you don't want to hurt someone else. Even if you need to for your own sanity, you still don't want to hurt people.
Yeah.
You don't want someone angry at you because then you're like, oh, they don't like me, right? But that's where manipulation and guilting comes into play. And it's just like, I've learned a lot in the last few years about setting boundaries. Like, I used to really care about everyone's opinion about me. Like, really, and want to try to, like, win them over. If, like, one negative review, like, how can I win this person over? Even though there's thousands of positive comments or whatever on something. And I was just like, I'm not going to be able to change someone's mind necessarily. And me putting energy on one person to try to make them, like me more is a waste of time. I think we've got to continue to just reflect on, like, okay, this person's not resonating with me. Is there something I can do to improve, to move forward? But if not, I'm not going to put my energy on trying to save one person's opinion about me, right? So I like this. So setting boundaries, define the boundary, creating like a calm communicational request with the boundary, and then staying your word and following through on the boundary. Otherwise, they'll never be met. Yeah. So how do you feel a year later not talking to your family now?
It's been a year. I mean, coming to the decision to not talk to them was complicated. It was really difficult, and that's why I speak very openly and honestly about it too. Because I think I'm very surprised when I get messages of other people that have certain amounts of distance between their family, complete no contact, and I was not aware that there were so many other people that had to put or had chosen to put distance in because I did not come by that decision. Easily. It was painful for me
35 years of
to
life
do that. Yeah. And I don't want to hurt them, and I do love them, and I do want what's best for them, but I also have to love yourself, me, and want what's best for me. So when I say it's been a hard year, I mean, I have moments, the holidays, and there's the positive and the negative of that now, on the one hand, it's like, oh, I can actually choose what I want to do for the holiday. That was completely new. Me and my partner are starting to make our own traditions because a requirement of family is everything is you better believe you're showing up for the big Italian Christmas gathering. So I was given little flexibility to have space apart around holidays, but obviously the other side of that came sadness, knowing that my family was having a holiday without me, with my nephew who's young there. I mean, it's complicated on a lot of levels.
They might be talking bad about you or whatever.
Oh, I know. I know that it's being viewed. Probably not me. I'm pretty positive, and my partner is very aware of this herself, that she's probably been villainized. It's probably her who's taken me away from the family. I mean, whatever story that they are going to create, they're going to create.
It's tough, though, because unfortunately, sometimes if family is only destructive towards you, you shouldn't have to stay there and be responsible for their joy and happiness for decades if they're always destructive towards your health, right? On another end, you could say, well, I'm just not going to allow it to affect me. I'll be around them. I'll still show up. I won't distance myself from the family, but I'm just not going to allow their thoughts or words or actions towards me affect me. Is that something that's healthy too, though? Just to be in the space while there's manipulation, guilt, shaming, or whatever, judgment, whatever's happening in family dynamics. Should people do that, or should they more separate themselves fully from family if it's a constant?
I think if they can. I mean, if they can find the way. So for me, I got really good at being okay with it, because what I would do, and I didn't, even though I heard this word in my schooling, I did not realize that this is what I was doing, is I would dissociate. Dissociate, yeah. So I call it my spaceship, where I would go away on.
You weren't present.
I wasn't present. I mean, I got very savvy. You would not have any idea having a conversation with me. I would be in that.
Looking through me.
Yeah. So let's let me tie this all together. The reason I could not remember my childhood is because I dissociated. So I wasn't present enough to put it in. So there's nothing there to re-access. So that's just to tie that all in.
You were physically present,
I was
but you were not
but that was out of
present.
because of the emotional overwhelm of the family, the anxiety, and no one modeling or helping me to navigate those feelings as we do as children. I will always say this: as children, I believe we come to this planet, however you think we get here, as adaptive, intuitive creatures.
Yeah, of course.
We all have a guidance system, and we all are incredibly flexible and adaptive. So I adapted. I dealt with my own emotions my own way, which was I dissociated. So some people, though, in adulthood can find the way to show up with their families. I talk a lot about depersonalizing, simply meaning not owning it. You know, even if they say something negative to you, if you can see that as more of a reflection of them, you can maybe come and go and leave that interaction and be okay enough. You know what to expect. You're not expecting them to change. You arrive. You deal with it.
Laugh at the situation.
You can maybe, I think humor is incredible, and then you leave. I did not find myself able, though, for that. I did not want to use my old habit of dissociation, and then, like I said, because of just the living structure and just the in-depth and ingrainedness of their dynamics, it was much harder for me to find that okay space. I don't know, honestly, what the future brings. I'm doing and I'm using, and so part of what would happen, I would go back, to visit, and then my partner would notice this as well, and I would then become almost regressed. I'd become reactive. So I was trying to heal, but I would only get so far, and then I'd be pulled right back down. Or the next health crisis, I'd be pulled right back in. So my healing was limited. So this year has been incredible for me to be able to actually gain some more full traction to do my own inner healing, so that I don't know if a future comes and I can have some version of contact with them. I'm not sure. But I know that I have to be in a different place if I am going to be that person who can come home, let them be them, and leave that home intact.
How do you forgive parents when, I know you publicly have talked about, what's it called, creating boundaries? Is it boundaries, or what's the thing you
Boundaries,
say?
yeah.
You've created a boundary where you don't speak to
I
your
have no
parents.
contact now.
You have no contact now. It's been, I think, a year or 2 years or something.
Year and a half.
As kids, how do we forgive our parents, even if what they did was the best they could do? Or maybe they didn't do such a good job. How do we forgive them either way? How do we learn to do that process so that it doesn't keep hurting us?
I think forgiveness comes when we're able to empathize or understand. Sometimes that does come, it can only come with distance. If we're living in the situation, it can be harder to create the distance to do this. But a lot of times as we age, as we just develop physically separate families, right, we can look back, and as we gain our own maturity and our own experience in relationship, that helps inform the ability to empathize, which just means to understand, from another's perspective, why or what might have been influencing the choices or the reactions that you maybe experienced within the relationship with them, right? So once we can understand, I think that allows a certain level of forgiveness. I think once we're also able to, in the process of understanding, let me word it this way, often what we find is that it was never really about us, us. Right? It was about their own past, their own traumas, their own inabilities. Again, as a kid, we're in what is called egocentric mind. We develop brain functioning, put it this way, it evolves over time. We don't just get all of the abilities that we have now.
Just self-aware at 5 years old.
Yes, no, not at all. And we go through a very critical developmental age range where we cannot empathize. We cannot see a perspective outside of our own. Everything is happening for us, because of us, to us. That is it. It's called egocentric.
We're the center of the world.
We are, quite literally. And we cognitively can't see otherwise. Right? So that's really problematic, because when a bad thing is inflicted upon us by our caregivers, we cannot help but assume it's because we're not worthy, not good enough, what have you. Right? We cannot do differently. But once we've developed a maturity and aged out of that, and maybe we
see perspective,
we are the adult, we can see perspective. Now maybe we can depersonalize it. We can see that, okay, even if it's egregious abuse, right? We might be able to even trace back, what had happened to that caregiver, that result. Doesn't okay it. When I have these conversations a lot, the response I get around boundaries too, right, is, well, you're okaying abuse, or you're okaying. No, it's an and situation. I can empathize. I can depersonalize. I can come to the understanding that it's not me, and I still might choose to put a boundary within this relationship. I still might choose to do whatever I want to choose to do. It becomes and. Right. Because I can understand, this is where I used to struggle a lot, because I have a crazy capacity to understand people and to understand why people do what they do. to the extent that I would invalidate my experience of them for so long and then allow them to do what they want to do around me or to me my whole life, right? So not helpful. So I had to evolve into that and. I can understand,
and I'm creating a boundary,
and this doesn't work for me.
And I'm breaking up with you.
So my life is going to now be over here, and. So I say that because empathizing, understanding, depersonalizing still can allow you to create important boundaries. So even if you're able to forgive your parents or whoever we're talking about here, doesn't mean that you have to accept them as an active relationship in your life. So I feel very forgiving of my family. I've always understood why and how these patterns have been put in place and translated, and why I've had the experiences within that family structure that I have. I'm, if you will, forgiving of them, right? And I still am choosing not to have a relationship because for me, for now, and where they're at with what my choice initially was to step away from the relationship, it just isn't happening in this moment. I don't know what the future will be.
Is it because it's too triggering for you when you're around them, or you just don't feel like you're in a good space?
In terms of connecting with them again?
Yeah, if you wanted to like hang out with them for the weekend, is it just too triggering for you to
So
feel?
in the beginning, it was. The reason I went full no contact.
Because you tried to renegotiate.
A year and a half ago.
Yeah,
because of the family structure, the lack of boundaries. Tune into the last episode. I talk all about it.
Yes.
That, being the case and it being triggering. So for me to get that stability in my healing, I have tried to re-engage contact with them now on one occasion, and I recently actually just sent them a letter to let them know that I'm living out here.
Wow, that's
and
great.
it has been met with, 3 occasions, because I recently sent my nephew a card that was also returned. So little messages trickling my way that they're maybe not interested right now in pursuing that open door.
Yeah.
So it's not about necessarily, I don't know how I would feel in front of them. That would be interesting for me now if we were able to find a way back to some sort of person-to-person interaction with one or all of the family members. I would be really interested to see how.
Videotape that and see
I'm
your
sure
reaction.
I'll be talking all about it if at some point
huge.
there becomes a reconnection. But I have tried, and it just seems like the door is closed on their end. I'm sure they're angry.
Yeah, of course.
I can even understand and forgive that.
Yeah, of course.
Because I know that
Our
they don't.
daughter doesn't respect
They don't
us.
understand.
Yeah, of course.
And I can't expect them to understand.
I feel like I've gotten to the point in my life where I'm pretty abundant, right? I've created the life I want from 11 years ago being the most scarce I could ever be, like broke on my sister's couch, no money and no clear vision of how to make money. To now it's like, okay, I'm not worried about eating for a long time. Unless something drastic happens, like I'm not worried about eating for a long time. I'm not worried about a roof over my head. I can live in a one-bedroom apartment and be fine, right? Studio, it doesn't matter. And I feel so good being independent that my current relationship, my girlfriend, is amazing. Like yesterday, I woke up late. It was a Sunday. I woke up late. I was supposed to get up earlier to work out, but I woke up late to a doorbell ringing because she's in Mexico City. She had sent me Starbucks latte. So I just woke up, I opened the door, and there's a latte from her, from Postmates. And I was just like, that just brings me so much joy. There was no expectation that she needed to do that, but it's just, I'm able to receive it so much better. And I don't have any expectation. I think when we put expectation on our partners so much, sure, there's certain boundaries and rules that we create in every relationship, but it's like, we shouldn't be expecting on the other person to make us happy. That's when we get let down.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. We shouldn't be expecting that. And part of, I think, a dynamic that unfolds in relationships is we look to recreate what we knew first of relationships, and those very early relationships. That becomes our normal, our familiar in relationships. So whether or not it's expectations, just emotional climates, we tend to look to recreate that which we first knew, because that's our first journey in relationships, is the caregiving, the family structure. It looks different for all of us, but whatever we're deposited in, right? You're seeing relationships happen. Sometimes you're getting direct messages about what's okay or not okay in relationships. And then you're having your own experience being in relationships with these humans. And then that becomes the relationship model that gets stored, that then gets replicated over time. So for me, My current relationship was a big shift out of my past ones because what I noticed looking back that I was searching for was those familiar feelings. So I felt closest to the people that
resented you,
that
guilted you,
no,
but
in some ways, but that were much more surface, that were anxiety I understood. So I had a lot of partners that also were very much relatable in that, because that's how my family unit felt. So it felt familiar. What we're seeking most as humans, the way I say it, is familiarity. And that comes up a lot in our relationship. So even if logically you can look and say, oh, maybe your friends are even telling you this isn't the partner for you, something feels really comfortable about it because that's what you're used to.
It's normal.
And I think that happens in terms of what you expect, like you were saying, in relationships, but also the feeling in a relationship registers too. And I think sometimes we're just seeking that familiar, even if it's not logically the partner that we necessarily want to be building the life with.
You mentioned you learned how to reparent yourself. What does that mean, parenting yourself?
So whether or not it's, there's a lot of categories of it, I think. So some of it's just our physical needs, right? How do we show up and take care of the body that we're in terms of sleeping and eating? And again, reminding each of us, or looking at those earliest models that we were given. What were we taught about those? Just very much just our basic needs. How are we exposed to them being met? What were we told about how they should or shouldn't be met? What do we see? How are they met, in those earliest environments? And then it's our emotional world, I think, is the other major category. So how do I learn my own emotions? How do I come to know what they feel like in the body? How do I come to know what to do with them?
And how do I learn, but also how do I re-talk to myself? Is that part of it too?
Re-talk to yourself. So for some of us, it's teaching. I mean, I had a family who did not talk about emotions. I think a lot of people.
Most people's families don't. Right?
Don't. So it's learning emotional language might be the how do I talk is to talk.
Why don't we talk? Because it's not on the school's responsibility to teach us emotions necessarily. Although I wish there was a class in school that taught us about emotions growing up. It's kind of what Mr. Rogers was about, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like was his mission, because he saw that but a lot of kids lacked the emotional capacity to express their feelings in a safe environment, right? It was anger, fighting, screaming, manipulation. It wasn't like, hey, this is how I'm feeling, right? Because the anger and other things were actually more acceptable, at least for me growing up. It's like showing that you're a man by being angry and fighting or punching, as opposed to like sitting down with a buddy of yours and be like, I'm really feeling sad about this in my life that the teacher did, you just get made fun of.
Yeah. I think there's societal messages. I often think about men a lot because I think you guys have really, really kind of structural messages that are put in place, passed down from society at large, that is quite damaging the way I see it. Family, cultures, and climates. It comes back to safety. When we have caregivers that aren't comfortable with their own emotions, they're not going to be comfortable with their children's emotions. So before we know it, we start to shave off the okay or the acceptable emotions in a family. And so either we're left with none being acceptable and we just don't talk about emotions. This was very much my family. Or we're left with only the handful of acceptable emotions.
Right. Which is anger or
and then we internalize this, and then we carry that into our adulthood. So now I'm the person in the relationship who doesn't address anything emotions, and I run from the conversation when I know when the person's across me saying, we got to talk, I'm like, I'm out of here. Bye-bye. Right. Maybe I'm on my spaceship now because I don't want to talk about emotion. That's scary to me. Or we become only these emotions are okay to talk about. So, and I think this is, again, passed down through generations. Likely our caregivers grow up in families where these emotions weren't okay and they were unsafe. That's what it comes down to.
Until you learn how to break the cycle, it's very hard to break the emotional cycle of how you were raised. For me, I started breaking it because I had a lot of breakdowns in my life. When I turned 30, I had a massive breakdown, a business partnership breakup, and I just started reacting in every area of my life when I felt I was under attack, when I felt like someone was abusing me, which was kind of my trigger. It was like when I feel abused. So I was sexually abused as a kid, and I was bullied and picked on, and it felt like I was the youngest of 4, and just felt like I was always the one who got the abuse. That's the story that I told myself for 30 years. And I got in a fight in a basketball game that meant nothing. The game was like a no-stakes game. It was just a pickup game. And I got in a really bad fight. And it's kind of like the perfect storm of like, why is all these breakdowns happening? It's when I finally was like, wow, I have a lot to lose here if I keep following this pattern. And I decided, I was like, I need to take a look at my life. I need to start making some changes. I need to start being aware of why I'm doing this and learn how I can break through these triggers. And that was really the game changer for me. But I feel like it's hard for people to want to look for growth and improvement in their life without some type of drastic event or events happening, a near-death situation, a breakup in a long-term relationship, a divorce, career ending, whatever it may be. Why is it so hard for us to want to improve or grow when there's no tragic accident?
Yeah, I often talk about having the kind of cataclysmic events are necessary in a sense.
Really?
So the way I see it is, I mean, it's not the only route. I think people can consciously just evolve and decide to change on their own. But a lot of times you will hear that as part of the journey, you know, the dark night of the soul, or, you know, whether it's something objectively ended, a loss, things like that. So something I've always said and I've always noticed about people and change, and then I've come to understand why this is the case. But something I've always said is we have to feel like that we have no other option. Like the option of life as we know it now is way more intolerable than the fear that comes along with change in general. And again, back to something I said earlier, we humans are habitual creatures. And to some extent, we view change or uncertainty as threatening. And there's a function now that I'm very much aware of the power of our subconscious. So the simplest way I describe it, and this is why I will always say change is hard. It's universally hard for all of us. I want to normalize that, though. I mean this when I say this, because I think a lot of people become really self-deprecating. I'm lazy. I'm undisciplined. I just can't do this. I'm hopeless when they realize change, when they live the experience of change being hard. The reason why change is hard is so our subconscious, it's a silly description, but I say we each have a little avatar. You have a Lewis one. I have a Nicole one. So because what our subconscious has done, and this blows my mind, it has logged every experience that we've had on this thus far until today, and will continue to log every experience we have in life until we're no longer on this planet, which is a lot of shit. And because we're very habitual, we need our subconscious. So this is me thank you, subconscious. We need it to some extent, because without some things automatized, some things in that program, if I had to wake up every day and remind myself and consciously think about being human, brushing my teeth, walking, driving, we would be debilitated. So we need this. However, what happens is because we're so habitual, what is in there are our behavioral habits. It more or less knows what we do first thing in the morning, last thing before bed. It knows the habitual thoughts that we think. It knows how those thoughts make us feel, right? So it has our little avatar. It registers things in a very black and white way. This is a very simplified description. It registers things in a very black and white way. The one end of the spectrum being familiar equals safe, good. Unfamiliar equals unsafe, possibly even threatening, bad. Right? So logically, right, you might sit across from me and you might say, you know, I want to start this new habit first thing in the morning, or I'm going to start to say new affirmations. I am good enough, or I want to give myself a feeling of peace. All I know is stress. Tomorrow comes and you give yourself one of those. You make the choice to have one of those new experiences, and your subconscious is going to register that as unfamiliar. And then one of two, maybe both things are going to happen. What I call mental chatter, the endless litany of reasons why not to do or never to do this thing again. It sucks. It's terrible. It's bad for you.
It's hard.
Or dangerous. Oh, what are you doing? And or, because some of us get this, we'll start to feel, whether it's physiological, an agitation. Sometimes it'll be described, I'm just crawling out of my skin. Sometimes I just won't feel like me. I'll start to feel weird. And again, that is the power of the subconscious. So for both of those reasons, before I know it, I'm right back in that comfort zone. I'm doing back what I'm used to doing, thinking, feeling, because it's familiar. Yeah. So that's why change is hard.
So how do we stay consistent with the change?
So the language I use is a small daily promise. And I put emphasis on that small, because I know, speaking about expectations again, we as humans can tend to, and a lot of us, I'm a perfectionist, we set the bar so high up for ourselves that is so damaging, because what we're looking for is consistency. I mean, that's what this means, to heal holistically, to create habits. It's not every other day we do it, or maybe this time and then next week I'll try it again. It's doing this each day. But the higher the bar is, if I don't meet that bar, I become so disempowered. I'm not going to show up and try to meet that bar again tomorrow. Hell no. I'd rather do any other thing on the planet. So setting up those small expectations.
It's almost like, okay, instead of saying I'm going to work out every day, it's saying I'm going to put on my tennis shoes and I'm going to take one step outside.
Yeah.
One step. Because that's going to ultimately lead you into doing more steps. Yep. As opposed to saying, okay, I'm going to floss all my teeth every night when I've never flossed, I'm just going to floss one tooth.
Yeah.
Like if you get out the floss and do one tooth, you're going to do another one, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you stop after 4 or 5,
and
but
even
at least
if you only
you're doing
do
half.
that one, this is also what I suggest. Notice each and every time you kept that promise, because that's you get what I say, getting past your mind. Because tomorrow when you go to floss that one tooth, and maybe it just was one tooth, right? Your mind is going to tell you all the reasons not to floss that one tooth again, right? So the more you show yourself that consistency, and the way I put it is we're rebuilding trust in ourselves. Most of us have, I say, self-betrayal. Most of us have started to not trust ourselves and not trust our word, because we don't keep our word to ourselves because change is hard, right? So this is all interconnected. So we have to rebuild trust, we have to show ourselves that we're keeping those promises. And we can't expect our subconscious to get on board. I joke and I say we can't wait for that cheerleading squad, and some of us wait to want to or to feel like we want to. So I'm always on my story saying, I don't want to do this shit, but I'm doing it anyway, because I've now built a trust in myself that I keep my word, and my subconscious still gives me all of the reasons not to do it, even years later into this. But the more you keep those promises and notice yourself keeping them, you start to trust yourself. And you start to get a little bit more empowered, getting beyond that mind.
And self-belief and confidence comes from keeping your word.
Yes, that's right. I think trust turns into confidence, turns into empowerment.
You believe you deserve abundance. You believe you deserve great relationships. You deserve better health when you fall through on that.
I was in a long-distance relationship for a year, and the relationship moved in. And things have become more, let's say, normalized, right? It wasn't every other weekend where I'm going to visit or she's visiting, and this incredible experience every weekend. We still have amazing experiences, but we're around each other all the time. And you said, I think you said, called it normal things in relationships. You said feeling bored or unsettled, being triggered consistently, mourning the loss of single life, which I've felt that before, and needing alone time. Because I think when we get in a relationship that's normal, you're around each other a lot and you feel like you need space, right? Why is this such a powerful post that you think that you shared?
I got so many messages in response to that post of gratitude. Thank you.
Okay to feel these things.
I've gotten people. I talked about this with my partner, my husband, and we're so grateful. You make us feel normal. We were really worried.
Not like our relationship is messed up.
No, thank you. We're feeling these things, and we now know that it's okay to feel these things. Some of it, I mean, first of all, the conversation we're having today, mostly, right? Most of it is around the relationships that we were modeled and the relationship that we were in at a young age, right? So that becomes our model for what relationships should be. Not all the times, of course, are we given the healthiest models. The relationships we're seeing happen and the relationships we're experiencing with caregivers around us, the peers around us, again, they're based in conditioning that for most of us, intergenerationally transmitted by caregivers and people who are, in their own world with their own issues, right? So not always the healthiest. So I think that's a big part of it. People just aren't modeled the healthiest type of relationships. I think that's a big part. And there's also, I think, the Disneyfication. I think I might have just made that word up.
No, but it's like this Disneyland.
That's another level of messaging
has to be like that all the
getting.
time. It's not that way.
Yeah.
But it's also, you get to create intimacy, passion, love. Like, you also, in my opinion, you shouldn't make it boring all the time. Like, you get to bring the energy, you get to bring the love, you get to be creative and care. And I think powerful relationships are ones that have caring and creativity. I think I heard Tony Robbins talk about that, where it's like, if you just have a little bit of creativity, you can create that spark all the time. And if you just show you care, it doesn't have to be this grand Disneyfication gesture, but just creativity and caring every day will make someone feel seen, acknowledged, appreciated, and enough. The thing that is our biggest trauma for most of us. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, anyways, I love that post. And the last post that I saw that was, for whatever reason, went crazy, is talking about childhood trauma and what childhood trauma also is, which is not just physical or sexual abuse, but other types of childhood trauma. You said a parent denying your reality, which is, I think, a big trauma for people that gets overlooked. A parent living vicariously through their child. Maybe, the soccer mom or dad or whatever that's always there at the events trying to hype them up because they never got that experience. And just not being seen or heard. That is trauma for children, childhood trauma. Is there anything else you want to add to that, or
why
that's so big for people?
So much that could be experienced as traumatizing in our earliest relationships. You picking up on the denial of reality one, I think that's again, have really met a minimum of people who haven't had that version of experience, because reality is subjective. So to have a caregiver be able to step out of what their perception of an event was to acknowledge your own takes this level of consciousness that we're talking about. And personally, I know I was not raised by two conscious humans, so they were not able to gift me with that.
So how do you speak to a child who's 7, who doesn't have the perception yet, who doesn't have the ability to see their own thoughts and observe their own thoughts? When you saw an experience happen and you're like calm and relaxed and they're going through stress and chaos, how do you communicate to a child about their reality without being like, just grow up, here's what happened, it's not that big a deal? How do you actually speak to someone in that situation then who has a chaotic reality or stressful reality?
Ask them. It can start with as simple as asking them. Parents, I think, lead with telling their kid, and they cut it off, or they assume why they think their kid is reacting, instead of saying, Johnny, what is going on? You look upset. What's happening for you right now? What's going on for you? What are you feeling in your body? What are you feeling like you want to do now? Just like asking. I think that's a really simplified answer instead of just assuming. And this happens too. I was sharing with my partner the other day, one of the most impactful gifts or lessons that I was taught by a supervisor clinically very early on was she pointed out to me that the importance of inquiring, especially around concepts that are quite universal. So for example, I've known anxiety, like I've been saying, my whole life. That's all I know. Just so happens that a lot of people that come into my treatment room or my old office have anxiety, right? So Lewis would bring you and say, I'm anxious. Oh, okay. And I could do one of two things. I could assume that when I hear you say anxiety, what my brain is going to do, let me put it this way, is going to overlay my anxiety. So I'm going to assume that what you mean by anxiety is exactly how I experience it. I'm always on edge, I feel irritable, sometimes I have panic. Right? I'm going to make your version of anxiety exactly what mine is. Or I could ask.
Yeah.
So the supervisor really emphasized the value of not assuming even if it's something that you've lived, especially when it's something you lived, ask what that person means. Oh, okay, Lewis, so anxiety feels different for everyone. So Johnny, little kid Johnny, right? Even if Johnny's like, I'm nervous, and okay, Johnny, tell me what nervous is for you. What's going on for you right now? What is making, even if you think you know what made Johnny nervous, ask Johnny. You might be surprised that that's not what made Johnny nervous at all. He made up some other story about what happened. That's what made him nervous. So asking is, I think, the most, with children, with anyone really, the most pivotal thing that you can do.
Asking and listening with an open mind.
Asking and listening. And then containing, this is where it gets really hard,
not
how you feel about what you're hearing.
Not trying to coach or teach.
Not trying to remove the discomfort that you're feeling. If Johnny does share something with you that I'm not a parent, I'm not going to be a parent, so I cannot relate. I can't empathize with how it must feel when a child that you've born, right, is having...
It's got to feel helpless at times.
I can't, so that's going to happen on top of what a million other feelings.
Gosh.
And as a parent in that moment, unfortunately, right, consciously, that's all happening over here. I need to learn how to contain that so I can save the space to hear and help Johnny. Because what we do, understandably, is I don't like how I feel. So now I tell Johnny, that's not what it was, Johnny. Stop it, you're fine. We're fine, is what I'm saying. We're fine, moving on.
You're fine.
And that's not helpful to Johnny. So it's...
That was my childhood. My dad saying you're fine with everything.
Yeah.
Even when it's like, no, I'm in pain. No, you're fine.
Is a tall task, which, like I was saying, we all are traumatized.
Yeah,
we're humans raising humans. There's no way. We don't have to be shameful.
Wow.
Parents listening don't have to feel shameful. I get a lot of parents who want the guidebook now on how to not fuck up their kids. And I'm always the bearer of the bad news that you're going to. There's going to be something that's going to happen and that's okay.
No.
If you teach your child resilience and how to process their own feelings,
and
they could actually come out the other side a much more resilient human being, things are going to happen. We're humans raising humans. That's why intergenerationally we're at that point in, like I said, the collective evolution that we all need to change.
Do you feel like we're, as humans, more messed up now than ever? I feel like the word mental health and the industry of self-help and the industry of therapy is just so much more talked about and bigger now than it was before. is it because we're more messed up now, or is it because we've always been messed up and now we're just finally using the tools or starting to learn about the tools and talking about it more?
I think in some ways, lifestyle choices that are now being made quite universally are resulting in, back to our pyramid, physiological dysregulations that are causing symptoms.
Which choices are the...
I think our food system. I think the amount that we're moving or not moving, the whole sedentary city life. I mean, we're in a very big building sitting here filming. This is not natural for us humans. This is actually quite stressful. Even though I feel very calm, I'm sure we all feel very calm in this room. This is actually quite stressful for us humans. So even the movement into cities, is a stress. We have to understand this. So there's a lot, I do believe, that has shifted just in terms of humanity that is causing symptoms.
A lack of nature.
Messed up, if you will, lack thereof. So
disconnection,
I also think that we're at a very beautiful time for humanity where we're awakening and we're actually moving toward healing at such a fast rate that I don't see it as we're going to hell in a handbasket and things are just becoming more fucked up or becoming more messed up. I actually think we're on the brink of incredible growth and incredible evolution as a species. Yeah. So I think it's that and again. But I do think that, just the humanity, there's a lot of just environments that we're living in that are causing a lot of stress on our systems.
What's the thing we need most, no matter where we're at in our stage of healing journey? What do we need to think about and remind ourselves the most every single day?
I think connecting to ourselves, coming back home, going inward. Reminding you that there is a self behind it all that you might feel very disconnected from, but that's worth getting to know. That makes all of this work worth it, right?
As a therapist doing this work, what's your biggest fear moving forward with the amount of attention that you've gained in the last year, 2 years, and the amount of attention you're going to continue to gain? Do you have any fears around that? Do you have any fears of anything?
Yeah.
I think insecurities or
I was gonna say, not
who am
necessarily,
I type of...
Yeah, so this beautifully, full circle, right? Back to that little girl who was never considered, who desperately wanted to be seen and considered. It's one of the most challenging things for me to do and show up for.
Really?
So this has been the case before, growth. I mean, this has been the case with 1,000 followers. This has been the case the first time I got on camera. This has been the case when I hit 1 million. So this will, I'm sure, as the numbers exponentially grow and as I start to do maybe speak things where I can see now the people more visually.
Like,
the internet is a great buffer. Although I have done the Googling of numbers to spook myself and be like, whoa, there's that many people in my community right now. I've stopped doing that now because it's gotten out of hand, but a little buffer virtually. So I think as I put myself more in front of the people and as I start to kind of concretize, that little girl wants to run for the hills. And she's still there. She considers it. Yeah, I mean, I'm often joking that I'm getting on the next airplane out of here and holistic psychology. I'm not. I'm not going to get anywhere. But that's that little girl. I understand what that is now. I don't have to take that to mean anything other than that little girl. It's just so unfamiliar being seen so vulnerably, being impacting other people because I'm being seen so vulnerable. That's another reason the impact, because I'm just being me. I'm putting authentic me out there and I'm being seen. And as much as I desperately want that, that's scary. It's uncomfortable. So it's not a fear. It's more just of a discomfort that is and has always been there.
Yeah. When do you feel the most loved?
When I'm considered.
But when are you considered? The way you want to be considered, right? What makes you feel the most considered?
No, when someone reflects something that I think I can identify as uniquely me or me back to me. Whether or not it's through a gesture, whether or not it's because they actually heard what I said. I mean, this sounds really simplistic, but listening in a reflective way where I'm actually hearing what you're saying as opposed to formulating my response or going down the journey of what association my mind brought up when you said the thing, that's a skill and that's hard. And we have to practice doing that. So when someone offers me that, when I feel like someone is truly present, as you even have been this interview to me, and you're hearing me and you're reflecting back what you heard me say, that makes me feel considered. Because you heard me. Yeah. Something that I said in that moment was uniquely mine, and you heard it. It can also be a gesture, where someone does something that is helpful to me. It makes me feel seen, cared for, loved. For who I am.
I like that. Okay, so just listening and reflecting back is
listening.
when you feel the most loved.
Yeah, when you're present and like you just heard me and got me in that moment. It could just be a micro moment, but I was a human and you were a human and we just had a connection.
Oh, that's cool.
And that's what I didn't really feel like I had growing up, and that's what makes me feel loved.
If you want to learn more about how to master your mind, check out this next video right here.
We're all faced with great opportunities brilliantly disguised as impossible situations, and we are at that point, at that nexus point in our evolution as a species. So then you don't try to fix that. That's never going to work. What you do